The termination notice was delivered to my inbox at exactly 6:47 in the morning on a freezing Wednesday. 2 paragraphs of standard human resources language, a digital signature, and 18 years of my life were reduced to corporate boilerplate. It was the standard text thanking me for my contributions and wishing me well in my future endeavors. But to understand how I reached that point, we must go back to the beginning. My name is Franklin Hayes, though most people in the industry just call me Frank. I am 53 years old, and until recently, I was the Director of Engineering at Summit Medical Technologies in St. Paul. I say was because that position is now held by my former boss's 27-year-old son, a young man who had worked at the company for exactly 14 months before being handed the key executive role. It all started 14 months ago in the dead of winter. The wind chill outside was 20 degrees below zero, and the heating vents in our St. Paul facility rattled constantly. I was in the laboratory running diagnostics on our flagship project, the Summit 9 patient monitoring form. My team of 11 engineers had spent 3 years developing this system, enduring countless late nights, weekend shifts, and validation tests. We had built every circuit, written every line of firmware, and tested every potential failure scenario. We were 6 weeks away from launch when Gerald Vance, the chief executive, called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. Gerald Vance stood at the front of the room wearing a sharp navy suit. He wore it to project authority, hoping to look like a visionary leader instead of the financial spreadsheet manager he actually was. The dry winter air made the room stuffy, and someone had left a half-eaten bagel on the windowsill, its cream cheese hardening. Outside, snow was falling sideways. I am thrilled to announce that my son Bradley Vance will be joining Summit Medical Technologies as our new Vice President of Product Innovation. Gerald announced, his voice booming with paternal pride. Bradley has just completed his Master of Business Administration at Kellogg and brings a fresh, modern perspective on where medical technology is heading. I want everyone to make him feel welcome and help him get up to speed on our current operations. The room erupted in polite applause. I joined in, assuming it was a vanity hire. In family-influenced corporate circles, this was common practice. A founder's son arrives with a fancy title, sits in meetings for a year, realizes he would rather work in venture capital, and quietly departs. I had witnessed this cycle before, but Bradley did not depart. Instead, he showed up every morning at 8:15, holding an expensive latte, wearing slim-fit designer clothing, and carrying himself with an unearned confidence. He would walk into the engineering lab, pull up a chair next to whichever developer was working, and ask questions that made it clear he had absolutely no understanding of medical devices. What is the difference between oxygen saturation and end-tidal carbon dioxide? He asked me one afternoon, pointing at a screen filled with complex waveform data. I explained the difference patiently, because mentoring is what I do. I have been in biomedical engineering since I was 24, starting as a basic bench technician at a hospital in Duluth, and working my way up through research and development at 3 different companies before landing at Summit 12 years ago. I was employee number 9 when the company operated out of a converted warehouse. I had helped design the original monitoring platform, debugged the sensor drift algorithms at 2 in the morning, and sat across from regulators who could have canceled our project with a single question. Now I was teaching the basic biology of patient monitoring to the chief executive's son. Bradley quickly began sitting in on our design reviews. Initially, he remained quiet, but soon he began questioning why we could not build our devices faster and cheaper. Why can we not just integrate artificial intelligence into the patient monitors? He asked during a review. Every competitor is talking about artificial intelligence in their marketing, because integrating artificial intelligence into a life support medical device requires a completely different regulatory pathway under federal guidelines, I explained, keeping my voice level. It would require 2 to 3 years of additional clinical validation and design controls. He would nod as if he understood, but then he would raise the same question the following week. My daughter, Chloe, noticed my exhaustion before anyone else. She was home for winter break from her pre-nursing program at the University of Wisconsin. We were sharing dinner at my apartment in northeast Minneapolis. My ex-wife, Brenda, and I had divorced when Chloe was 11, and we had shared custody for years. Now that Chloe was 20, she chose to spend her breaks with me, a fact that always brought me quiet joy. "You look exhausted, Dad," Chloe said, studying me with the sharp eyes she inherited from her mother. "It is just work," I replied, focusing on my food. "We have a new executive learning the ropes." "Is he competent?" she asked. "He is the chief executive's son," I said. "That should tell you everything." Chloe set her fork down. "Dad, if they try to take advantage of your work, promise me you will not just accept it." "Nobody is taking advantage of me," I said, trying to reassure my daughter. "Boss seared me." She insisted, crossing her arms. "I promise," I replied. That night, I stayed up until 1 in the morning, reviewing a 40-page proposal Bradley had written to redesign our user interface. It was filled with modern business jargon, but contained zero actual engineering specifications. I spent hours rewriting the feasibility section, correcting his technical errors, and returned it to him with his name still on the cover. That was my first major mistake. By the time spring arrived, Bradley was presenting my team's data at board meetings. He stood before the directors using slides I had created, numbers I had calculated, and market projections I had modeled. He spoke with a polished, rehearsed voice, dropping phrases like paradigm optimization and scalable innovation architecture, while the board members nodded in approval. Gerald sat at the head of the table, beaming like a proud father at a little league game. I sat in the back row, watching my life's work being explained by someone who could not write a line of code. The Summit 9 platform launched in May to exceptional reviews. 3 major hospital networks signed purchase contracts within the first month. My team had accomplished something truly incredible. However, on launch day, Gerald sent a company-wide email thanking Bradley for his visionary leadership in bringing the product to market. My name was never mentioned. Douglas Sato, my lead firmware engineer, found me in the testing lab after the email was sent. He placed a cup of black coffee on my workbench and stood there in silence. Doug had worked with me for 9 years. He knew how I took my coffee, knew my daughter's name, and knew about my back surgery from 2 years ago. "You saw the email?" I asked, taking a sip. "Everyone saw it," Doug replied quietly. "What are you going to do, Frank?" "My job," I said. "The same as I always do," but it was not the same. In June, Bradley moved his office down to the engineering floor. Without consulting anyone, he had the facilities team relocate our project room, the one with the whiteboards where we mapped out system architectures and debugged complex code. In its place, he installed a standing desk, a designer chair, a potted fig tree, and his Kellogg diploma. He also began copying himself on all my communications with our component suppliers and started scheduling independent meetings with our contract manufacturers. I found out about his interference when a supplier in Shenzhen contacted me, asking why Bradley had requested a quote for an alternative sensor that was not compatible with our system. I walked straight into his new office without knocking. "You cannot change the sensor specifications without going through our engineering validation process," I said, keeping my voice firm. "That component interfaces directly with 3 other critical subsystems. If you swap it out to save money, you will invalidate our federal regulatory clearance." "Relax, Frank," Bradley said, leaning back in his leather chair with a patronizing smile. "I am just looking at our options. We are spending too much on the primary sensor. I found a manufacturer that can supply a similar component for 40% less. It is 40% less because it uses a different technology with much wider tolerances," I explained. "If we change it, we will need at least 6 months of bench testing and validation to ensure it does not fail in the field." "Let me worry about the business and financial decisions," Bradley replied. "You just focus on the technical details." "The technical details are the business," I shot back. "If a patient monitor fails to report an accurate oxygen level in an intensive care unit, a patient dies." He waved his hand dismissively. "Nobody is going to die, Frank. Let us not get dramatic." I walked out of his office before I lost my temper. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and began updating my resume for the first time in 12 years. The opportunity came in late August. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair, the chief medical officer at Aegis Health Instruments in Chicago, called me directly. We had met at a medical technology conference in San Diego 2 years prior and had spent hours discussing the future of wireless patient monitoring. "Frank, I will be direct," she said. "We are building a next-generation wireless monitoring platform, and I need someone who has successfully brought a product through the regulatory process from start to finish. Your name came up multiple times. I can offer you the position of Vice President of Engineering with full authority over product development. The salary is $195,000, plus equity that vests over 4 years. If we meet our engineering milestones, that equity will be worth a significant amount." I stared at the numbers. Summit was currently paying me $128,000, and I had received a meager 3% raise after launching a product that was projected to generate $14 million in annual revenue. "I need 1 week to think it over," I told the doctor. "Take 2 weeks, Frank," she said, "but do not wait too long. The train is leaving the station." After the call, I phoned Chloe. I explained the offer and my hesitation about relocating to Chicago. "Dad, take the job," Chloe said immediately. "You have been miserable at Summit for a year. You are not sleeping, you are barely eating, and that kid is taking credit for everything you built. You cannot stay at a company that does not value your expertise." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Chicago is 4 hours away." "I am sure," she said, "and I am proud of you for recognizing your worth." Her support was all I needed. On Monday morning, I walked into Gerald Vance's office and handed him my formal resignation letter, effective in 2 weeks. Gerald Vance was laughing on the phone when I walked in, but when he saw the expression on my face, he hung up immediately. He read my resignation letter twice, the color draining from his face. "Is this some kind of negotiation tactic?" Gerald asked, standing up from his desk. "Frank, we can discuss a salary increase or a new title. You are the backbone of our engineering department. It is not about money, Gerald," I said. "Then what is it?" he demanded. I looked at him, remembering the man who had hired me 12 years ago when Summit was just a struggling startup. Over the years, his focus had shifted from medical excellence to securing his family's financial dynasty at any cost. "It is about working under leadership that respects the engineering process and understands the safety implications of our technology," I said. "Are you saying I do not respect the process?" Gerald asked, his jaw tightening. "I am saying you have allowed your son to override critical engineering protocols to satisfy his ego," I answered. "If you leave now, you are abandoning the Summit 9 project," Gerald said, his voice turning cold. "The team will fall apart without you. Then you should have considered that before you handed a vice president title to a kid who cannot distinguish between a firmware update and a social media post," I replied. I walked out, leaving him standing in silence. The remaining 2 weeks were tense. Bradley avoided me entirely, and Gerald sent Valerie, the chief operating officer, to manage the transition. Valerie had been with Summit for 6 years and had the difficult task of pretending my departure was a routine event. My team, however, was devastated. Doug Sato cornered me in the parking garage after work one evening, the cool September air visible with our breath. "Tell me you are not really leaving, Frank," Doug said. "I have to, Doug," I replied. "I am taking a position in Chicago at Aegis Health Instruments." Doug stared at the concrete floor. "Half the engineers here only stay because of you. If you leave, this place will lose its core." "They will be fine," I said, though I knew he was right. I could not remain at a company to salvage a succession plan that I had no hand in shaping. On my final Friday, I packed 12 years of my professional life into 2 cardboard boxes. I packed a ceramic coffee mug Chloe had made for me in the 8th grade with a crooked handle and the words "World's Okayest Dad" painted on the side. I packed a framed photograph of my team celebrating the Summit 9's successful bench validation and my original employee identification badge, from when I had more hair and weighed 15 pounds less. Gerald did not leave his office to say goodbye. Bradley sent a brief, one-line message on our internal chat wishing me luck. I loaded the boxes into my vehicle, sat in the quiet parking garage for several minutes, and then drove to my apartment. I ordered a pizza I was too tired to eat, watching the Minneapolis skyline fade into darkness. However, before I logged out of the company server for the last time, I initiated my final strategy. I drafted a comprehensive 10-page technical memorandum and addressed it directly to every member of the board of directors. In this document, I detailed the specific safety risks associated with Bradley's proposed sensor swap, citing federal regulations under Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 820, which governs medical device design controls. Under these strict federal guidelines, any component change in a cleared life support device requires rigorous verification, software validation, and a complete design review signed by the head of engineering. I explicitly stated that bypassing these validation protocols constituted a severe breach of fiduciary duty by executive management, exposing the corporation to massive civil liabilities and potential criminal negligence. I warned the board members that ignoring these safety standards could make them personally liable for corporate waste and negligence. Furthermore, I submitted a confidential whistleblower report to the Food and Drug Administration, documenting the attempted quality control violations and attaching the engineering schematics, emails, and Bradley's unauthorized quotes from the cheap Shenzhen supplier. I was not going to let them destroy my reputation or harm patients without leaving a paper trail that proved my team's opposition. I began my new role at Aegis Health Instruments the following Monday. The environment was entirely different. The office was located in a renovated brick warehouse in Chicago's West Loop, featuring exposed timber and modern laboratories. Dr. Evelyn Sinclair met me at the doors. "Welcome, Frank," she said warmly. "Let us build something that actually saves lives." Within 3 months, my new team of 8 engineers had completed the prototype for the Aegis 1, a wireless telemetry platform capable of monitoring 12 vital signs simultaneously. The engineering process was respected, resources were abundant, and Evelyn understood the technical requirements because she had spent 20 years practicing medicine. My daughter, Chloe, came to visit me in Chicago during November. I picked her up from the airport and drove her to my new apartment in Lincoln Park. The apartment was smaller than my previous home, but it offered a view of the park and enough natural light to keep the basil plant she had gifted me alive. "You look completely different, Dad," Chloe said, studying me as I prepared dinner. "Different how?" I asked. "You look 10 years younger," she said. "The stress is gone." She was right. I was sleeping through the night, eating balanced meals, and my back pain had subsided because I was no longer working midnight shifts to cover for executive incompetence. The storm broke in February. I was in the laboratory when my phone rang. It was Doug Sato, calling from an unfamiliar number. "Frank, I am using a burner phone," Doug said, his voice trembling. "Things are incredibly bad here at Summit." "What happened?" I asked, my chest tightening. "After you left, Bradley pushed through the cheaper sensor from the Shenzhen supplier," Doug explained. "He bypassed the entire validation sequence and rushed the modified Summit 9 monitors into production to meet the quarterly cost reduction targets Gerald had promised the board. 3 weeks after the new units were shipped to hospitals, 2 facilities reported erratic cardiac readings. In one case, a patient in a post-surgical unit suffered a severe cardiac event because the monitor reported stable oxygen saturation numbers when her levels were actually dropping. "Is she alive?" I asked. "She survived," Doug said, "but she was hypoxic for nearly 40 minutes before the nursing staff noticed the physical symptoms and intervened manually. Her name is Eleanor Higgins. She is 68 years old, a retired school teacher who taught science in Bloomington for 30 years. She has permanent cognitive deficits now, struggling with memory loss and basic daily tasks. Her family has already retained a prominent medical malpractice legal team, and the federal government is launching an investigation into Summit's design controls." My stomach churned. A 68-year-old girlfriend with Brad Pre's brain damage because a 27-year-old executive wanted to show a $380,000 cost savings on a corporate spreadsheet. Summit is recalling 4,200 units across 14 states, Doug continued. The estimated recall costs, legal liabilities, and lost contracts are projected to exceed $23 million. Gerald is trying to blame the manufacturing team, claiming it was an assembly error. "He cannot blame manufacturing," I said. "The design control documentation must show who approved the change." "It does," Doug said. "We kept copies of everything. just like you instructed us to do. Bradley signed the component approval form, overriding the engineering veto, and the board members are already referencing the memorandum you sent them when you resigned. They realized they were warned in writing about the breach of fiduciary duty and the violation of federal regulations. The news of the federal investigation and the recall was published in the national media in March. The articles detailed how the chief executive's son had approved unvalidated components, resulting in patient harm. The report specifically mentioned that the Food and Drug Administration had been alerted months earlier by a confidential whistleblower, which allowed inspectors to target the design history files immediately. The federal inspectors discovered that the mandatory design control protocols had been completely bypassed, and there was no engineering verification report for the new sensor. Gerald attempted to manage the corporate fallout with a massive public relations campaign, but he appeared broken and exhausted. Bradley stood behind him during press conferences, silent and pale, his arrogance replaced by the realization that his decisions carried real-world consequences. The Food and Drug Administration issued a formal warning letter, and 2 of Summit's primary hospital network contracts were immediately suspended. The hospital network's legal departments issued immediate breach of contract notices, citing the strict regulatory compliance indemnity clauses we had written into the original agreements. The legal departments demanded full refunds for all the recalled monitors and substantial financial compensation for patient exposure. Faced with my technical memorandum and the mounting pressure of the federal investigation, the board of directors filed a lawsuit against Gerald and Bradley Vance for breach of fiduciary duty, corporate waste, and negligence. The board demanded Gerald's immediate resignation. When he refused, 3 board members resigned, and the remaining directors voted to remove him as chief executive officer. My phone began ringing continuously. Former colleagues, industry analysts, and suppliers called to discuss the collapse of Summit. Doug called me again. "Half the engineering team is looking to leave," Doug said. "Can you help us?" I spoke with Evelyn Sinclair immediately. She did not hesitate. "We need talented engineers, Frank," she said. "Hire Doug and whoever else from his team wants to join us." By the end of April, we had hired 3 of Summit's top engineers, with Doug leading our firmware development. They were eager to work in an environment where safety was prioritized. Doug arrived at Aegis, carrying a cardboard box similar to the one I had filled months earlier. We were working late in the laboratory one evening, calibrating the sensor arrays for the Aegis 1, when Doug looked up from his workstation. "You told them exactly what would happen, Frank," Doug said, shaking his head. "You spelled it out in the memorandum, and they still did it." "They thought the rules did not apply to them," I said. "They believed a corporate title was a substitute for technical competence." Doug smiled. "Gerald called me last week, before he was ousted. He offered me a promotion to director if I would stay and help them rebuild. I told him I would rather write firmware in a warehouse in Chicago than spend another day watching his family play business." We returned to our work, the hum of the test equipment filling the room. My daughter Chloe called me over the weekend with exciting news. "Dad, I received my final clinical placement for the autumn semester," she said. "I will be at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in the cardiac care unit. I will be living just 20 minutes away from you." "That is the best news I have heard all year," I said, smiling. "I am proud of you, Dad," Chloe said quietly. "You stood up for what was right, and now you are building something that actually protects patients." Her words meant more to me than any promotion or corporate accolade. A few weeks later, I was grabbing dinner at a small ramen shop near our office. The restaurant was tiny, with only 8 stools at a wooden counter and steam rising from the large pots of broth. I was eating slowly, thinking about the upcoming clinical trials for the Aegis 1, when the door opened. I did not look up until I heard a quiet voice speak my name. "Frank?" I turned and saw Bradley Vance. He looked entirely different. The expensive designer clothing was gone, replaced by a simple jacket and worn jeans. He had dark circles under his eyes and appeared to have lost weight. He stood in the doorway, looking hesitant. "Bradley," I said. Gesturing to the empty stool beside me, he sat down, staring at the counter. "I heard you were in Chicago," he said. Yes, I am the vice president of engineering at Aegis now, I replied. I wanted to apologize, Bradley said, his voice barely audible over the restaurant noise. I thought my degree gave me the authority to make those decisions. I did not understand that engineering was about human lives, not just cost reduction, and now a patient is injured because of me. I looked at him. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by genuine remorse. I realized he was carrying a heavy burden, but he needed to face the reality of what he had done. Have you apologized to Eleanor Higgins? I asked. My legal counsel advised me not to make contact because of the civil lawsuit, he whispered. Forget the lawsuit, I told him. You go to Bloomington. You sit in that woman's living room. You look her family in the eye, and you tell them you are sorry. That is the minimum you owe them for what you did. Bradley nodded slowly, his eyes filling with tears. My father will not speak to me. He blames me for the collapse of the company, even though he was the one who pushed me into the role. Your father made his choices and you made yours, I said. Now you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. Nobody in the medical technology field will hire me, he said, looking lost. Then start from the bottom, I advised. Apply at a hospital, not as an executive or a manager, but as a basic equipment technician. Spend 2 years maintaining devices, cleaning sensors, and learning how they are used on the patient floor. Understand the connection between the hardware and the patient before you ever sit behind an office desk again. In this field, every circuit and every line of code represents a contract of trust with a patient who is at their most vulnerable. If you do not respect that, you do not belong in this industry. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded. Thank you for telling me the truth, Frank. Everyone else just told me what I wanted to hear. That was because they feared your father's authority, I said. I never did. I paid for my meal, stood up, and walked out into the cool Chicago night. The spring air was crisp, and the lights of the city reflected off the dark waters of the lake. My phone buzzed with a message from Chloe, listing the dates of her arrival in Chicago. When she arrived in autumn, I helped her move into her apartment. We celebrated with dinner at a deep-dish pizza restaurant, laughing about her friend Maya's disbelief at the thickness of the crust. Later, I took Chloe to the Aegis laboratories and showed her the Aegis 1 monitors. Knowing she would be using them in her clinical rotation at Northwestern Memorial brought a sense of complete resolution. 12 years at Summit had felt like the pinnacle of my career, but I realized I had merely been protecting someone else's inheritance. Now, at Aegis, working with a team that valued integrity and designing technology that would genuinely keep patients safe, I was doing the real work. I walked back to my apartment, ready for the trials to begin the next morning.